Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas has been in the news recently for a lot of hot water for his relationship to a guy named Harlan Crow and some other people, right? For basically accepting gifts that he shouldn't be accepting bribes, that kind of thing. And here's the thing about this, folks, right? Is that it's not just about, because you're starting to see from the right wing, when they try to defend this and all that, they're saying, oh, they're just gifts, they're harmless, they're just friends and all this other crap. And, of course he's going to accept it, blah, blah, blah. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's a reason why we have laws against politicians and people, federal employees in particular, accepting gifts. The emoluments clause in the Constitution. Remember, this is a clause put in by our founding fathers that basically said that anybody who works as a federal employee of the federal government, right, which includes the Supreme Court Justice, includes the president, includes senators, stuff like that, should not be accepting gifts. Why is that there? Because of the undue influence that such gifts can lead to. So I want to bring you guys back to the pre-civil rights era in the United States, the Jim Crow era. And I'm sure all of you know the history of Jim Crow and all that stuff, right? I'm not going to get into that too much. But one of the things that they would do in order to stop, basically to disenfranchise people of color, black people in general in this country, is pass very ridiculous laws. Things that would essentially prevent anybody who wasn't white from voting. And I'm sure you've all heard about these. They had a grandfather clause. That was one. Said if your grandfather couldn't vote, then you can't vote. That took out pretty much every black person in the country. They would pass things like literacy tests and then put this super ridiculous literacy test that nobody could pass. That was designed to be confusing and stuff. But, only people in certain districts had to take them, and lo and behold, that was just the places where black people lived. White people never had to take the literacy tests. Stuff like that. They put poll taxes, etc., etc., etc. And these were all ways of disenfranchising people, because you couldn't, even way back then, even back in the pre-civil rights era, you couldn't pass a law saying black people are not allowed to vote. You couldn't do that. You couldn't make it blatant like that, because that would get overturned. So you'd have to find some other bullshit reason, right? It kind of reminds me of how, like, red states before Roe v. Wade was overturned, how they would come up with really ridiculous over-regulations in order to stop abortion clinics, right? Like, you would see things like in Texas, they would say, okay, every abortion clinic has to have a hallway that's this long and this tall and all that. And if the hallway is like too short, then you're not allowed to operate there. Stuff like that. Or you can't be within, 6 miles of a church or whatever. Like, the crap like that, right? This ridiculous, like, over-regulations that were basically there to prevent people from having abortions. Exact same kind of thing, right? All of that went away with the Civil Rights Act, because there is a section of the Civil Rights Act the Voting Rights Act in 1965, excuse me, not Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act in 1965, because there's a section 5 which required that any laws like this have to be pre-cleared by the Department of Justice, right? And if the Department of Justice said, hey, this law is racist, this law is designed to prevent people from voting in a malicious way, then that law got overturned. And that it was like that for 40 years. In 2017, I think is what it was. Let me see. What was that? Which year was that? I think it was rather recently. That law got overturned. The Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was overturned. And now we're starting to see laws that are designed to stop people from voting, that affect black people in a much higher rate than white people, right? An example, in Texas, The Texas state legislature just passed a bill which would allow the Secretary of State to overturn the results in a specific county for very ridiculous reasons, right? The reason that they're giving is that if the polling places run out of paper for the paper ballots, and if they run out of paper for more than an hour, the election becomes null and void, right? Now, why is that? Because in 2022, when the Republicans were expecting there to be a red wave and that didn't materialize, right? There was one particular county where they ran out of paper and they weren't able to vote for a few hours, right? And so that became sort of a conspiracy theory among Republicans in Texas saying, hey, we would have won this county if they would have been able to vote, but they ran out of paper, so that's why they couldn't vote, and that's why we lost. And this was Harris County in Texas, right? Just so happens that Harris County has a racial demographic which is 80% non-white people. And this law that just got passed says, okay, well, we can overturn an election if they run out of paper, but there has to be this many people living in the district. There has to be 2.7 million people in the district, right? And it just so happens Harris County is the only district in Texas that has that many people in it. So it's a law specifically designed to allow the Republican Secretary of State in Texas to overturn the election results in one specific county where Democrats consistently win. That's what this is. Under the Voting Rights Act of 1965, this should be illegal. But the enforcement part, Section 5, was overturned by the Supreme Court. So there's no way. Well, okay, let me rephrase that, right? Section 5 is still there. It's still technically the law, but what it was that it was the method by which Section 5 was enacted. It was called the preclearance requirement. The preclearance requirement is the requirement basically said that the Department of Justice had to pre-clear any such laws like this, and that's what was overturned, right? So without that pre-clearance requirement, right, there is no way to enforce the Voting Rights Act. So it's still technically the law, but there's no way to enforce it thanks to the Supreme Court. That case was Shelby County v. Holder. Now here, let me explain, because what does this have to do with Clarence Thomas? What does that have to do with any of this? Well, it goes like this. So there's a story in the Washington Post, and they kind of exposed that there was a guy named Leonard Leo who works for the Federalist Society, right? And what it was is that this was in 2012. And what it was is that he contracted with Kellyanne Conway with her polling company, because back in 2012, she ran a polling company which was coincidentally called the Polling Company. Very imaginative name there. But anyway, so this guy, Leonard Leo, contracts with Kellyanne Conway in order to pay the wife of Clarence Thomas, her name is Ginni Thomas, for work that was done, supposedly. A number of payments which came out to around $80,000. And this guy Leo tells Kellyanne Conway to bill a nonprofit, which was called the Judicial Education Project, right? Which is a Republican sort of nonprofit group. And he tells Kellyanne Conway to just send the bill to them, but on the invoice, don't put Ginni Thomas's name on the invoice. So what does this mean exactly, right? Well, this means that this guy, Leonard Leo, was using Kellyanne Conway in order to hide a payment from somebody to Ginni Thomas. Now, the official reason on the invoice was supplement for the construction, polling, and opinion consulting. That was what on the invoice, that was the purpose of the bill. What does that mean exactly? Supplement for the construction polling and opinion consulting. That doesn't actually describe what Ginni Thomas actually did for. Supposedly, the idea is that she should have been working for Kellyanne Conway. Was she's, Kellyanne Conway said that she was a contractor of hers, that she was actually doing work for her, right? Well, how come if she was a contractor with Kellyanne Conway, how come this guy Leonard Leo is the one paying money to her? Why did Leonard Leo say to Kellyanne Conway, bill this nonprofit, give the money to Ginni Thomas, and don't put Ginni Thomas's name on the invoice? Seems a little illegal, seems a little shifty, doesn't it? Kind of sounds like money laundering. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like this guy Leonard Leo is using Kellyanne Conway's firm to hide a payment, to launder a payment to Ginni Thomas, so that officially on the books it would look like she did work for Kellyanne Conway, but in real life the money is coming from somewhere else. And of course, Clarence Thomas doesn't declare this. This doesn't show up anywhere because there's no requirement saying that he has to declare anything. How does this relate to this law in Texas? Well, the same year, the Judicial Education Project filed a brief to the Supreme Court in a landmark voting rights case. This case was Shelby County versus Holder, and that was the case challenging the Voting Rights Act, specifically the preclearance clause of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, where Clarence Thomas ruled in favor of, take a wild guess, right? Rules in favor of the people who were paying his wife and strikes that down. So there you go, folks. It's corruption 101 right there. Corrupt guy that works for the Heritage Foundation uses a nonprofit to pay the wife of a Supreme Court justice, who later on, that same nonprofit has a case before the Supreme Court, and that justice rules in favor of the people who paid his wife. How is that shit not illegal? Why are we not throwing people in jail for that? How is that not illegal? The whole point of the Supreme Court being a lifetime appointment is supposed to be so that they're above the fray. That's the justification for making them a lifetime appointment. Is that they don't have skin in the game. That no matter what happens, nobody can take away their position, so they should be free to rule their conscience, right? Because if they had to be elected, for example, then you could say that, okay, well, they may make political decisions in order to get reelected or something, or they may like bend to the whims of whatever, a political party, something like that. And the whole point of them being there permanently is so that they can be free to make those decisions and not be affected personally. And this is kind of going right into the face of that. This is demonstrating that no, the Supreme Court is vulnerable to bribery, just like anybody else, just like any other politician. They take bribes, right? They toe the party line. And the thing is that judges in lower courts would have to, at the very least, there's ethical barriers in place, so where they would have to recuse himself. What should have happened here is that Thomas should have recused himself, saying, "Hey, I've got a personal connection to the defendant in this case," or whatever. That's what judges are supposed to do when there's any sort of appearance of like impropriety like that. They're supposed to recuse themselves. They're supposed to not rule on it. Supposed to let the rest of the court rule, whatever. Did he recuse himself? Nope. Why? Because he's under no obligation to. Because the Supreme Court doesn't have those same kinds of ethical rules that the lower courts have. That even senators and congressmen and House reps and stuff. They have tougher ethical rules in place. Although, they never fucking follow them. But still, even they have tougher rules in place, right? Supreme Court doesn't have any at all. There's no ethical rules at all keeping them from doing anything. Why? That shit is fucking ridiculous. And here's the other thing. What if Congress were to put some in place? I'm pretty sure the Supreme Court would just overturn it anyway, saying, no, we're not going to follow those. That judicial review is a power that the Supreme Court has taken upon itself. That's not in the Constitution. There is nothing in the Constitution that says the Supreme Court has the ability to overturn laws from Congress. The Supreme Court is supposed to interpret the law from Congress, not overturn laws. Right? They're not supposed to be able to do that. Not in the Constitution. No. No, they're supposed to interpret the Constitution and say, this law should be enforced this way or that way. But not that, no, this particular clause of that law is overturned. It's not supposed to happen. Our country is broken, folks. Our country is absolutely fucking broken. And that's why it's a big fucking deal that all of this shit is coming out about Clarence Thomas, right? That's why it's a huge deal. It's all, if you think it doesn't affect you personally just because some rich asshole is giving him gifts and stuff, or that his wife is taking money from fucking right-wing think tanks and crap like that, it already has affected you. It already has affected you. It's already happened. So that's why this thing with Harlan Crow is such a big deal. That's Justice Thomas's sort of rich benefactor. That's the guy that's given him these fucking super expensive vacations, right? Flying him around in a private jet, letting him hang out in his like private invite only resort in the fucking Cancun or whatever. One thing he did is he bought Clarence Thomas's his mother's house for it was like $150,000. Like bought her house and then fixed it up, and then Clarence Thomas's mom lives there rent free. Like the house belongs to Harlan Crow, but his mother just lives there rent free. It's like, I mean, if that's not a fucking gift, then what is? He gave Clarence Thomas a Bible that belonged to Frederick Douglass that was valued at $19,000. The New York Times did a story that started detailing the relationship between Clarence Thomas and Harlan Crow. And then after that story came out, Clarence Thomas just stopped reporting this stuff. He just stopped, because he actually did report a few of these things. And then that story came out, and then he just stopped reporting it. And did anybody do anything? No. Why? Because he's not required to report this stuff anyway. There's no law. There's no rules in place that require him to report it at all. So he just stopped doing it. He just said, fuck it. And did anybody do anything about it? Nope. Some other shit. He made a $100,000 donation to Yale, which is Thomas's alma mater. That was listed as the Justice Thomas Portrait Fund. Speaking of portraits, he's also gotten free portraits of Clarence Thomas and his wife made by an artist named Sheriff Terabee, located in Montreal. Harlan Crow just paid for that. So here you go, free pictures. Go ahead and take them. Another one, he's got a private jet. He's got this huge fucking giant yacht that he just brings fucking Clarence Thomas around with all the time, getting free trips everywhere with it. He paid for Clarence Thomas's son to go to a prestigious academy called the Hidden Lake Academy, right? Apparently tuition at this place was $6,000 a month, which is fucking, I can't believe how expensive that shit is. It's like, god damn, that's one expensive ass fucking school. That's what is that, $60,000, $72,000 a year just to send your kid to fuck that shit. Right? Harlan Crow paid for that to send Clarence Thomas's son to this incredibly posh rich kid school. Just pay the tuition for that. And then you wonder why the Supreme Court is so fucked up. Here's the thing about that, right? So people might say something like, well, if they follow the Emoluments Clause. The Emoluments Clause says that you're not allowed to accept gifts like that. And that's the law, right? That's the law. Clarence Thomas should at the very least be impeached for this, if not thrown in jail for breaking that law. At the very least, he should lose his job. Now, some people might go, well, what do you do then if some rich guy makes a donation in your favor or something like that? Or if a rich guy wants to give you, if a rich guy, like, they fly you out to do a speech or something, are you not allowed to accept the free plane ticket? Because that'll happen a lot too. Like, they'll go give a speech at some place or whatever like that, and some organization will pay for their hotel rooms or whatever. And then people are going, yeah, well, should he just not? Like, what happens if they do that? Like, are you expecting him to pay for his own rooms or whatever? Yes, I am. What should happen, what Clarence Thomas should do when someone offers him stuff like that, free hotel rooms, donation in your name to Yale, something like that, or a $19,000 Bible that belonged to Frederick Douglass. When somebody offers him those things, he should not accept them because he's already being paid by the United States government. All right, our tax dollars pay this fucking guy, and our tax dollars pay him to be non-partial. We're paying him to be fair. We're expecting him to go in and make decisions for us and to do it from an unbiased perspective. He's supposed to be above this shit. He's not supposed to be involved in the daily politics of everything. He's not supposed to be taking sides. That's what fucking Supreme Court is for. He's not doing that. He's accepting bribes and giving preferential treatment to fucking people. And that's why shit like fucking the Voting Rights Act is getting overturned. And now 4.7 million people in Texas are basically going to lose their fucking... They're going to be disenfranchised. The next time there's an election and they vote for somebody that the Republicans don't like, they're going to find a bullshit excuse and take away their vote. And it's going to be 100% fucking legal because Clarence fucking Thomas took a bribe. This shit is there for a reason, folks. These laws that got passed in the past in order to stop shit like this, it was there for a reason. Because people were abusing it. The whole reason why the Voting Rights Act had that provision in the first place, the whole reason why there was a pre-clearance requirement in the Voting Rights Act anyway, is because before they put it in there, the southern states they had to play whack-a-mole with the southern states because they would go, okay, well this law is unconstitutional. This law over here that says that okay, all people who have dark skin are not allowed to vote or whatever. That law it breaks the Voting Rights Act, and then that one would get overturned, and then the Kentucky or whatever or Alabama would just pass another law that they would just reword it slightly, and it would go into effect, and then they'd have to go through the courts in order to knock that one down, and then they would just pass the exact same law and they reword it again, and that shit happened all throughout like the 40s and 50s and shit, and that's the whole reason why there is a pre-clearance clause in the first place. It's because they were basically, the racists and the fucking segregationists and the other assholes who are trying to stop black people from voting in the South were essentially just using the power of the state legislature to skirt the law like that. And in order to stop it, there was no way to stop it without putting this clause in. Well, now that clause is gone. And we are always hearing recently about all these laws, these voter suppression laws. How many of them have been knocked down? It takes years for shit to go through the courts. A law might get enacted now, and it might take 5 years for it to go through the courts. In the meantime, 3 fucking elections go through while that happens. Right? Elections have consequences. And that's the whole plan in the first place. That's why this shit matters. This is really... Clarence Thomas should be impeached. We should get rid of this fucking guy. He's as corrupt as hell. And he's not the only one. He needs to be impeached. They need to make an example of him. And they need to put, Congress needs to act. Because the Supreme Court won't. Supreme Court will not police itself. They've already shown that. Congress needs to act. Congress needs to get in there and pass a fucking law saying, okay, these are the ethical standards by which the Supreme Court will obey. They don't obey those guidelines, not even guidelines, it should be a law. It should be, these are the standards. If they don't obey those standards, they get impeached. That's what needs to fucking happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, folks. Just telling you that right now. Our country is broken. Right? Be happy with what you got because it's not going to change. So, but I don't know. That doesn't mean you give up. Don't give up. Fight like hell. Vote. All that shit. But let's be realistic here, right? Hello folks, if you like what I do and you want to support the channel, please consider buying something from my Etsy shop, supporting me on Patreon, liking and subscribing, and checking me out across my social media links listed below. Thank you all so much, and see you next time.